Hi, in today's video I'm going to cover a common situation that comes up when our customers receive their newly rebuilt Intercom Master Stations back after they've been repaired. In today's video we're going to feature the IM3003. People get their intercom systems back from us. They've been thoroughly rebuilt and they've been tested, and all the features and all the functions have been checked out to make sure that they work. And when people receive their sets back, it's up to them to reinstall the systems as it was before they took it out and sent it to us. And the most common call or email that we get when people have their systems back is something like, I've reinstalled it and everything seems to work. The intercom worked, radio works, I was able to set the clock, but the doorbell doesn't ring. So in today's video, I'm going to cover the different things that come up when I help people out with this situation and sort out what's gone wrong or what wasn't done correctly or what was overlooked. Here we have a newly rebuilt IM3003M. It's M is for modern, which is the black faceplate with the chrome accents. And it's installed in our test panel here, and it has been checked out just like I do on all 3003s, and it does work completely. When Mrs. Jones gets it back and she's reinstalled it, the doorbell doesn't ring. So let's look at why that could be. The first thing that you have to do is we're going to open it back up just like it would be at her house when she went and reinstalled it. So here we're looking at the back of Mrs. Jones's IM3003, and we need to figure out why the door chime's not ringing. So the very first thing you have to do is you have to locate the chime module. And the chime module in a 3003 is this circuit board right here. It's mounted on the back of the faceplate to the left of the speaker cone. And all NuTone Chime modules are fundamentally the same type of layout. They will vary in appearance from period to period, but they're all fundamentally the same. This is a mid-80s Chime module, and all Chime modules have 4 terminals where wires can be connected. You always have one large terminal, which is this one, and that's on here it's called PB for push button common. Later on it just says common on the board, but there's always one on a large standoff with a screw in the middle, and then there are 3 smaller ones, and they're always in a row down the length of the chime module. Sometimes they're on the left hand side, sometimes they're more in the middle, sometimes they're more on the right. It depends on when the chime module was made. But they're all fundamentally the same, and they all hook up exactly the same way. So here we have the push button common, and then we have a terminal for the side door, the rear door, and the front door. And almost in every home you have a connection to the front door, and then some homes have a rear door button or a side door button also. So you may have multiple wires on here. If when the system was taken out and Mrs. Jones followed our removal video, if she had labeled the wires or took a picture of the connections with her phone before she disconnected it, that would be a big help when it comes time to reinstall it. But sometimes people just forget how things were. So in this particular case right now, it's pretty obvious that the reason that the chime module isn't working is because there's no wires connected to it. So somewhere back in the wall housing, there's going to be some wires that were connected to something previously, but now they're not. So let's take a look and see if we can find those. So as we look around inside the wall housing, which is the metal box in the wall behind the master station, there'll be a great number of wires. In this example, there's less than what you would see in most situations, but what we're looking for wires that had been previously connected and now are sort of floating around in there, not connected to anything. So as we look around, we find right off the bat, here's a pair of red wires, and you can see the ends of the wires are kind of bent over as if they had been previously wrapped around something, perhaps screws on a chime module. So these most likely would be the chime module wires. They're also long enough to reach the chime module, which is a good indication that that could be where it goes. If when the system was taken out to be shipped to us for repair, if these had been labeled with a piece of tape that said chime or something like that on them, it would be easier to put them back today. But since they're not, we're going to make a guess that that's probably where it is. I don't see any other wires in there, so those are probably the one. Now, one of the things that comes up when people are talking to me and they're looking for wires, they're always telling me about what color wires they have. And in this particular case, here we have a red and red-white pair. The red-white refers to the white stripe on one of the red wires. In some cases, you could possibly have some orange wires, or sometimes you might have a green and a white wire, or maybe you have a red and a black, or a black and a yellow, or a brown and a purple. It doesn't really make any difference what color the wires are, because what it really comes down to is back in 1986, when Mrs. Jones's intercom system, when her home was wired for her 3003 intercom system, Joe the installer used whatever kind of wire he had on his truck that day. Not every installer uses all genuine NuTone wire. Lots of times they use telephone wire, they'll use security system wire, they'll use wire that they bought at the local hardware store that they had left over from a previous job and they don't want to waste it. So the color of the wire doesn't really make any difference. It's just a matter of finding the two wires that had been previously connected to the Chime module and then hook them back up. So in this particular case, we're going to go with the red and red-white wire because I'm pretty certain that that's the wire Joe put in. Alright, so now we've located our two door chime wires. So the number one cause, I would say, of door chimes or chime modules not ringing is that there's actually no wires connected to them. So that needs to be corrected. To do it properly, one of the wires, and it does not matter which one, you can use the red and white or you can use the solid red. It doesn't make any difference which way you hook it up. One of them has to go under the push button common screw, which is the large screw on the end of the row. And then the other one goes on either front, rear, or side. By default, in most installations, it will go on the front terminal because that gives you the long 8-note Westminster chime that you probably have had hooked up at your house since 1986. So now we've hooked up the two wires. We have one on push button common and we have one on front. Now when we go out to the front porch and push the button, the chime module should ring. So that's the number one problem that people have, is that there's no wires connected to the chime module. The second most common problem we have is this. We're going to take the one wire off the push button common and we're going to connect it up to the screw that says side, which happens to be incredibly tight and doesn't want to loosen. Wow, okay, we need a bigger screwdriver for that. Alright, so now we're going to put the red-white wire on the screw that says side. Okay, so now we do have two wires hooked up, but they're not hooked up correctly. They're actually completely wrong. You can't have one wire on side and one wire on front, or one wire on rear and one wire on front, or one wire on side and one wire on rear. You have to have one wire on push button common, and the second wire can go on either of these three screws depending on how you want the chime module to ring in your home. So this would be the second most common problem that we find, is people hook up the wires on the wrong screws. And amazingly enough, people always swear that that's how it was hooked up when they took it out, but it wasn't, because it would never work that way. So let's go ahead and take this back off, and we're going to put it back on common where it belongs. Alright, so now we've found our wires and we have them hooked up to the correct screws, but when you go out on the front porch and you push the button, it still doesn't ring. So why is that? Well, first, to understand why that could be the case, we have to look at how a chime module is wired into your system. So let's go to the whiteboard. Alright, so here's our whiteboard drawing of an IM3003 system. This is very simplified because we only care about the chime module and the push button. We're not really concerned about anything else because Mrs. Jones told us that the radio plays, the intercom works, she can talk to the front door. It's only the door chime that's a problem. So here's our representation of an IM3003, and mounted in the corner, just like in the real Master Station, is our Chime Module, which could either be an IA28, an IA29, or in some really rare cases an IA27, but those are pretty rare, so I don't think you'll have one of those. And here are our 4 screw terminals, just like on the real Chime Module. We have common, side, rear, and front. Way over here on your front porch is your front door speaker. And here's your door speaker. This represents the speaker cone, which has absolutely nothing to do with the Chime Module. Not at all. It's strictly for communication. It has nothing to do with making the doorbell ring at all. But down below on the same plate that the speaker is mounted to, we have the little push button. And this is the button that you just went out and pushed and it didn't ring. So let's look at how this is connected up and where the potential problems are. Between the Chime Module in the IM3003 and the push button on your front porch door speaker, there are wires. And in this example, we're going to use 2 colors. We're going to have orange and brown, because Joe had orange and brown wire back in 1986 when he had put in another kind of system, and he wants to use it up because he's not wasteful. So between the Chime Module and the push button, there will be 2 wires. So one wire is going to be brown, and it goes from the common terminal on the Chime Module. It travels up or down the wall, through the ceiling, across the vaulted ceiling, way across the family room, and all the way around, and connects to one of the screws on the push button. Then the orange wire, which is connected to the front terminal, follows the brown wire, because when the wire was manufactured, it was twisted together, so it's a pair of wires. And it travels with the brown wire all the way to the other terminal or other screw connection on the push button. And those are the 2 wires that make the Chime Module activate when the button is pressed. So to recap, we've connected our wires to the Chime Module on the proper terminals. The wires travel through your house out to your front porch and are connected to the button. So you push the button and it didn't ring. So why is that? Well, there are 2 likely causes. It could be a problem with the little button itself, because Mrs. Jones's button has been outside in the winter and summer of Minneapolis for 30 years. And little doorbell buttons outside for 30 years have a pretty hard life, and the brass contacts inside get corroded and they don't make a good connection, or the 2 plastic halves of the button that lock together break, and then it doesn't make a proper connection. So the very first thing you would do is you would remove the button from the faceplate, or remove the faceplate altogether and pop the button out. And we do have a video that shows how to do that, and I'll put a link in the description down below. And you would remove the wires from the back of the button, and you would touch them together. And if that makes the Chime Module ring inside the house, then you know you have a bad button. Okay. If you touch the 2 wires together and it still doesn't ring, then that indicates that you most likely have a problem with the wire that connects the button to the Chime Module. So since it's a long trek through your house for the wire, it could have gotten damaged somewhere along the line. Maybe a mouse chewed on the wire or something like that, and that'll have to be addressed to make it work. But before you go through all the work to try to figure out what's wrong with the wire, I'm going to give you sort of a shortcut that will make sure that you need to do the checking of the wire before you actually get too far into it. So let's go back to the Master Station. Okay, so we're back in Mrs. Jones's house, and we're still looking at the back of her IM3003 Master Station, and we've sorted out the correct wires onto the Chime Module. And as a note, the wires that we have connected here, the red and red-white, should be the same color as the wires on the back of her push button. because if the wires travel from here to the button, it would be one continuous length of wire, and they should be the same color. If they're not, something's wrong. So to verify, whenever you're doing troubleshooting, it's good and it's important to start from what I call a known good point. And the known good point should be, and this is the known good point for you, the person doing the troubleshooting. It's not for me as the person that repaired the intercom, because I've already tested the Chime module and I know that when it left the shop it worked. But it's for your own peace of mind to know that you're not spinning your wheels in the wrong direction, because you need to start from a known good point. So the best way to start from a known good point with the Chime module is to verify that it actually does work. And it doesn't have to work with the wire and the push button that's installed in your house, because you can make it work right here. So what we're going to do is, and you can do this with the wires still connected, or you can do it with the wires disconnected, whichever makes the most sense for you. But to test the Chime module, to prove to yourself that it does ring when it's activated, what you're going to need is a little piece of wire. It doesn't matter what kind of wire it is. This is just a little piece of wire. It's about 4 inches long. And what I like to do when I do this is I bend it over in half, and I twist the middle together a little bit, because that kind of makes a little handle so it's easy to hold on to. So all we're going to do is we're going to jumper between the common terminal and the 3 other terminals. And this essentially takes the place of the push button and the wires. This is now the push button. So if we put it on push button common and touch the side terminal, it rings 1 note. If we touch the rear terminal, it rings 2 notes. And if we touch the... That's what happens when you touch the front terminal. You get the 8 notes. So now we know, because we verified by using the jumper, that the Chime module does actually work. When it's triggered by making the proper connections, it rings through its chime cycle. So that tells us that it has to be a problem with either the wiring to the button or the button itself. Since we've already bypassed the button on the front porch, that only leaves the wiring. Now sometimes in some installations you might have some extra wires, and if you do, you can utilize one of those. If you don't, then it's a more arduous repair, because you have to either find the break in the wire or you have to run a new wire, and that can be difficult in some homes or impossible in some homes, or some homes it's very easy to do. But let's look at what you might have if you have extra wire. So as you poke around in the wall housing and you have all of these different wires, some of them are in the way and some of them are not, what we kind of see here is that here are our red and red-white wires that we chose for the Chime module terminals. And these are the same wires that we are connected to the button on the back of the door speaker out on your front porch. But this red and red-white pair seem to be part of a cable. Here's the cable that has more than just 2 wires in it. We have an orange and an orange-white wire here, which looks like it's connected to the terminals on the terminal board for the door speaker, so you can speak back and forth to the front door. So those 2 are already being used. However, here we have a black and black wire, and they're unused, and they're wrapped around the outside of the cable jacket just to keep them out of the way. So in this case, we'll unwrap these. We seem to have some extra wire. How good is that? Obviously Joe the installer was thinking ahead. So these don't look to me like they've ever been used or anything before. Joe was a smart installer, and he ran some NuTone 6 conductor cable, because Joe is probably old school like me. And you have some backup wires. And in our line of work, backup wires is always a good thing. So what you can do is, if you want to use these, what you have to do is you have to go back out to your front porch. You have to see that you have the same extra black and black wires behind your door speaker, and chances are you do. If you do, you can simply substitute these for the red and white wires that have a problem and hook the other ends of these to the button, and it probably will work. So you have to be somewhat clever. There is also a workaround for Chime modules on 80s and 90s systems where you can actually have the door speaker and the Chime module work on a total of 3 wires. Normally the door speaker takes 2 wires and the Chime module takes 2 more wires for a total of 4, but if you're clever and you know how to do it, you can make it work on 3. It's too complicated to explain here. I think I'll post the sheet on our website that shows how to make that connection. Even with the diagram on the sheet that shows you how, it's still a little bit confusing, so it could be the kind of thing that you might want to call to talk to me about, and I'll explain it to you. But sometimes that will work out pretty well, and I'll show you how come that often works out. Okay, so an IM3003 is what we call a 3-wire system, and that means that there's a cable that runs between the master station and each remote speaker on the system. And in that cable, there are 3 conductors. This is an actual piece of NuTone IM3003 intercom cable. You have a red wire, a blue wire, and of course you have the one in the center because it's between the other 2. A lot of installers, since this wire is being used on every single speaker run in the house, a lot of installers will use the 3-conductor wire to also make the run between the master station and the front door speaker to be hooked up to the actual speaker for communication. Since that connection generally only requires 2 wires, they'll take the 3rd wire and they'll fold it back around the cable just to keep it out of the way, and they'll just use these 2, just like Joe the installer did in Minneapolis in 1986. But you have an extra wire, and remember, an extra wire in our line of work is always a good thing. If you have some IW3 that runs to your front door station, you can actually make the doorbell and the door speaker work just on these 3 wires, and if the wire that's run to the button is damaged, you can bypass it altogether and just use this. So again, having extra wires, always a good thing. I hope this wasn't too confusing, and I tried to make it as clear as I possibly could. I hope you found it to be interesting and helpful with your Chime module problems, or perhaps your doorbell button problems. If you did, please give it a big thumbs up on YouTube. We would appreciate it if you would consider subscribing to our YouTube channel. The more people that subscribe, the higher we turn up in YouTube search results, and more people can find our information and we can help them with their intercom systems. That's all for today. See you on the next video.